Hey everybody, how's it going? Getting everything caught up here because it's crunch time on Wednesdays. I usually will have to go either before the class and you can watch it later and not live, or go after the class. Well, it would be the second half of class because I always like to leave you half to do your work. So we are on chapter 4 at this point, and that is the social service delivery system. And the public social services. So here's some of the things, like as a social worker, that we will get involved in. And that would be local, state, and federal laws with the public social services. That's who funds them. It is usually part of the government, like child protective services, stuff of that nature. There's also a bit of bureaucratic hierarchy, funded by taxes, and then there'll be civil service hiring. So those are, entry-level social work jobs. Some folks, since especially the 80s, have started private social services. Like they would then have agency bylaws. They may have an affiliation with national organizations. Some that come to mind are like Ohio Mentor, United Way, things of that nature. They have shared management. Often have another private source of income, and then different agency standards for hiring. But even at Ohio Mentor, with the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, we were able to bill Medicare and Medicaid. So that did help for some government funding. Then there's also the contrasts between public and private services. So I'm going to zoom in on this one for us. So the authority with public is local, state, and federal laws. With private services, it's articles of incorporation bylaws. The scope with public services is laws that specify exact intent and the scope of the programs. Private services usually have the agency mission, providing direct, flexible programming. The affiliation with public services would be part of local, state, or national government, whereas the affiliation with private services, they're relatively autonomous, although agencies may affiliate with regional or national organizations. Then there is the structure, and that is some of the bureaucratic hierarchies. With private services, it varies according to size, from hierarchical to the shared management. Income sources for public is definitely only taxes, but with private services, you've got contributions, fees, grants, and other private sources of income. It might be a federal grant. And then hiring practices, typically civil service, and then private is agency standards and practices. So here's like the referrals. With public services, it's often through Social Security Administration, maybe Township Youth Services, VA Social Work Department has some, County Nursing Home and Home Health Services, and then State Department of Children's Services. With private, it's more with using resource and referral that they get some of theirs. The Jewish Federation of Multi-Purpose Senior Center, United Ecumenical Food Pantry, Clinical Social Work Services, Inc., or local hospitals social work department. So those are some of the areas they get them. Now, here's the organization type. With agencies, they deliver the social services. Associations do more of an advanced purpose of membership, or even provide membership services. Some examples of these associations are like the Alliance for Children and Families, American Public Service Organization. the Association of Community Organization and Social Administration. And then you have Canadian Association of Social Workers, Child Welfare League of America, and then the Council on Social Work Education. That's who we are under, CSWE. Since we're accredited, you actually could cut out a half of your graduate school by getting a Bachelor of Social Work here. That's one of the nice things about being accredited by CSWE is you can go into grad school advanced standing and only do 1 year for a clinical master's. There's also the International Federation of Social Workers. That's what your next paper's on. The new one is this NASW Code of Ethics. So the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. And you're basically going to write one of the ethics you agree with and one that you think you would have a hard time with as a social worker. Now, here are some of the social service settings. You could either be primary and host. You could also be sectarian and non-sectarian. You could also be private, for-profit, and not-for-profit. You could have your own private practice. When you get your independent license after your master's in social work, you can run your own business, essentially. You're not dependently licensed anymore. So you can do work on your own. And the last one here is the urban and rural differences in social work you'll see. Even at the private practice, we noticed some of that's come up. And the types of clients, the types of issues, homelessness, food insecurity kind of covers all of them, but some of those challenges. Now, funding sources, again, you've got grants, and that's something that I'd like you guys to look into, grants.gov, just to see funding sources of places you would work for. So you could try to get them a new stream of funds. You've also got community funds. Sometimes there's endowments. A lot of times, especially at private practice, there's a fee for service because you can't always collect all that you need to from either insurance or Medicaid. And there's a copay sometimes. So with insurance reimbursement, that's the next one. You've got often a copayment. And then there's even purchase of service contracts. Like somebody could buy you out and say that you will service the local middle school with social work services. Now, here's some of the different income sources. The community chest might be an annual application or new programs allocation. You've got emergency flood relief. There's special 1-year funds. There's the Williams Foundation response to RFP, maybe 2-year funding. That's request for proposal. There's also Community Technology Inc. That could be in-kind computer hardware and software. The Molly Barker Trust. And these are resource and referral sources of income. So different things that come up there. You also have a community block grant. That would be an annual grant request. Riverboat Authority grant. So these are a lot of ideas of grants you can do. That would be startup funds or demonstration project. Friends of Resource and Referral. That's annual solicitation, fundraising events. There's Henley's Department Store. That's incentive match for fund drive. Gifts and memorials. That would be from donor contributions. So those are ideas for funding. Here's some of the issues in funding. Privatization. They may have different specific requests if you're privatized. Competition for funding among agencies. So you're applying against many other agencies that could come up. Protection of agency self-interest or agency turfism. And then social triage to limit access to services. There's also stuff with social work professionals. You have to get your license, so that's credentialing. Either a Bachelor of Social Work or a Master of Social Work can help you get the initial LSW license. And if you want to go independent license, You definitely have to get a master's because that means you are no longer dependent on a supervisor to look over your work. There's also regulation of social work practice, like the state licensing and registration, um, legal regulation. There's also paraprofessionals and volunteers. So this could be entry level positions that augment professional services. Like when I got my psychology degree, that would be all that I could get a paraprofessional. I wouldn't get a license or have access to a license. Volunteers also can help with policy making, sometimes advocacy or administrative, and occasionally direct service. We did that a lot at Camp Stepping Stones for the disabled. Lots of need for volunteers because there just wasn't enough funding. Then you've got self-help groups. This would be more like Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's over 25 million people participate in self-help groups. That's almost 10% of our population. They're used both separate from and in addition to professional services. So when I see somebody at the private practice, if they come in for alcoholism, I often close them out with a referral to go to their local Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Again, that's on them. So you hope that they get to the meetings before you totally close them out so they know where to go and you see that they're doing it. But again, because counseling is voluntary, sometimes they do and occasionally they don't, especially if they're not court ordered. These are used both separate from and in addition to professional services. The format differs based on principles of empowerment and mutual aid. And the final piece says research evidence supports all of its effectiveness because there is research to support how effective self-help groups are, 12-step groups. And the final slide for chapter 4, because I wanted to get back into the video on the code of ethics, which is your next paper. It's premier service delivery. So comprehensive coordinated system of service delivery is client-driven with consumer involvement, flexible funding parameters, broad eligibility, focus on prevention, and provide services as social utilities. So let me get into these. NASW Code of Ethics, your next paper being on this. Videos, there's a few that describe it well.
Give me 15 seconds and I'll show you how to get featured
commercial out of the way.
Like NBC News, the Today Show with People Magazine.
YouTube, welcome. In today's video, we're going to address the pink elephant in the room. I've gotten a lot of questions about it, so we're finally going to address it. Not those elephants. We're talking about the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics. How many of you guys have read the Code of Ethics? The Code of Ethics is literally our guide, our blueprint for how to navigate these challenging situations we may find ourselves in as social workers. And I highly encourage, not only just for the LSW and FCSW exam, but just for our benefit as a whole, because again, we could find ourselves in these challenging predicaments and not being exactly sure how to navigate these situations we may find ourselves in. So let's read through it and see what it says. While I definitely recommend reading through every part, and it may seem long and everything at first, but it's not that bad of a read, honestly. And again, this pertains specifically to our profession as social workers as a whole. More so focused on the ethical standards and giving this a good read through, because there are a good amount of questions that may appear on the exam that are directly addressed within the Code of Ethics, so we know how to navigate these challenging situations, these predicaments us as social workers may find ourselves in. So just kind of going through it a bit. Even when we talk about things such as, let's use a random one, termination of services, right? Social workers should terminate services to clients and professional relationships with them when such services and relationships are no longer required or no longer serve the client's needs or interests. Let's look at C in particular, right? Social workers in fee-for-service settings may terminate services to clients who are not paying an overdue balance if the financial contractual agreements have been made clear to the client, if the client does not pose an imminent danger to self or others, and if the clinical and other consequences of the current non-payment have been addressed and discussed with the client. So we can use this information, again, how to navigate these difficult, challenging situations, because on the exam and in real life, of course, the exam may ask, hey, when can we terminate a client that's not paying their bill? Like, it may place us, the social worker, in a scenario where a client hasn't paid the bill based off of certain factors, is saying like, hey, can we terminate this client? And the answer is we can, as long as they specify here, if the client does not pose an imminent danger to self or others, and if the clinical and other consequences of the current non-payment have been addressed and discussed with the client. So if we're taking the exam and we get a question that talks about terminating a client who has not paid their bill, are we essentially able to terminate them? Has the criteria been met? Are they a danger to themselves or other people? Have we discussed the non-payment with them? Because if we just terminate them, oh, they missed one payment, they're late by a day, termination, that's it. No, we want to make sure that, again, they're not a danger to themselves or others, and that we have the proper dialogue with them, that we discussed it with them, see what's going on, et cetera, before we can proceed with termination due to a non-payment of services. Another question that may pop up on the exams is, how long should I keep the client's records after they completed treatment, right? And when we look at 3.04, client's records, focusing on D, social workers should store records following the termination of services to ensure reasonable future access. Records should be maintained for the number of years required by relevant laws, agency policies, and contracts. So essentially, if you see an answer choice where it speaks to refer to state guidelines, that would most likely be the correct answer, because it can vary from state to state. But that is a common thing I would hear, especially even for myself when I was studying for these exams, of, wait a second, how long should I keep a client's records for after they completed treatment? So now let's look at 3.06, client transfer, focusing on A. When an individual who is receiving services from another agency or colleague contacts a social worker for services, the social worker should carefully consider the client's needs before agreeing to provide services. To minimize possible confusion and conflict, social workers should discuss the potential clients, the nature of the client's current relationship with other service providers, and the implications, including possible benefits or risk of entering into a relationship with a new service provider. And then they have B right here of, let's get it right here. If a new client has been served by another agency or colleague, social workers should discuss with the client whether consultation with the previous service provider is in the client's best interest. So we may get a question on the exam that kind of discusses when we're having a transfer or referral, right? And these are some of the things that we want to do and make sure that are in place, so that it can go as smoothly as possible, so it's in the client's best interest. And as we scroll through the ethical standards, we'll gain information about, again, how to navigate and proceed within these situations that us as social workers may find ourselves in. And I really, really encourage us to give this a good read through. Now let's go back up to 1.08, access to records, focusing on A. Social workers should provide clients with reasonable access to records concerning the clients. Social workers who are concerned that clients' access to their records could cause serious misunderstanding or harm to the client should provide assistance in interpreting the records in consultation with the client regarding the records. Social workers should limit clients' access to their records or portions of their records only in exceptional circumstances when there is compelling evidence that such access would cause serious harm to the client. Both client's request and the rationale for withholding some of or all of the records should be documented in client's file. So if we find ourselves doing this again in our professional life, or we're doing it for the exam, we want to make sure that these things are being addressed within the question. If this is what the question is asking on the exam about, we're in a scenario of withholding or potentially withholding a client's records, or in our professional life where, we're saying like, oh, I don't know if I should disclose all the records because this could, cause some significant harm in some type of way, where we want to make sure we document that as well. And when we look at B, social workers should develop and inform clients about their policies consistent with prevailing social work ethical standards on the use of technology to provide clients with access to their records. And C, when providing clients with access to their records, social workers should take steps to protect the confidentiality of other individuals identified or discussed in such records. So again, we may get questions on the exam that speaks to this of, hey, us, the social worker, are in this scenario. What's the first, next, or the best possible answer given the details of the question of what it's asking? And again, the Code of Ethics tells us exactly what to do by giving us a guide, a playbook, if you will, of how to navigate these situations. And again, the exam aside, and of course we need to pass the LSW and LCSW exam to become licensed social workers and a licensed clinical social worker. But the licensure aside, as professionals, especially if we're gonna, open up our own private practice, we wanna be able to know how to navigate these situations. So, if nothing else, give this a good read through, give it a good 2 read throughs. And that way, when we see those things pop up on the exam, it's like, oh, we know what the answer is. We know what to look for, because if these things haven't been accounted for, kind of like when we're disclosing clients' records, when it comes to, release of information, like all of that stuff, we know how to proceed, and it helps navigate us through these questions. So definitely get a read through. I'm gonna put the link down in the description and we'll go from there. Okay, guys, that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with a friend. Share with someone that's studying for the LSW or the LCSW exam. And in the link in the description, you can find my socials and also, of course, a link to.
All right, so reading the Code of Ethics, that's just like a brief of some of the things that you want to go through. You may have heard one in there that you agree with and see why they have that in the Code of Ethics, and there may be others in there that you don't understand or think it would be hard to take care of in a way. And with a lot of students, the one about not being able to hug somebody is one of the challenges that they have seen. I'm going to show you the instructions for this paper number 2. So we do finish in the middle of July, so that's why there are assignments due every 2 weeks. That would be, again, on like week 2, 4, 6, and 8, and that covers all of the assignments. So here is your next assignment, is paper number 2. So it's called the values paper. Description is in there, so you can see that. It's also in the syllabus. And in the values assignment, you are to review the NASW Code of Ethics. You can just do a search for that and download it, so you own a copy for yourself. It's a good generic one that a lot of professions use too. So write the paper comparing and contrasting their personal values with the values contained in the code. Students should critically evaluate their own values and thoughtfully give examples of areas of compatibility with their own values, as well as areas on incompatibility. The paper is to be about 3 or 4 pages, so they're getting a little longer. Like this one's 3, the next one's 4 to 5, and then I try to top it off there as one of your longest. Critical analysis with the use of Lowenberg and Dolgoff ethical principles. You can look that one up, but they give a way to evaluate an ethical principle. Or you can use the Reamer social work values hierarchy, or any ethical decision-making model you find, and then explain the process you would apply to address the ethical situation. And that one's for the next assignment. There's a good 7 days left until that one's due, but I wanted to give you guys the heads up ahead of time and start you out on chapter 5 Friday, because we are getting to where we're almost at the halfway point. I guess chapter 7 out of 14, but we're getting close to that halfway point only because it's an 8-week class total. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to email. I see Ashley on here, and you guys can come by office hours whenever you'd want. If you are in person, I know some of you are remote, and that's okay. Just email any questions, and I will make sure to get back to you. Again, this one I started early and pre-recorded because we have a research meeting at 1:30. So on Wednesdays, I often have to record early, or it's the second half of class. So you all have a good middle of the week, and I will see you on Friday. And on that day, we'll start up on chapter 5. But be sure to review the video if you wanted a description of the next assignment. So we'll see you Friday.